Hey everyone, you're watching Conversations in Pop Culture, and I am your host, Andrew Davis. And we are brought to you by my sponsors, Mixum Printing, the smarter way to print. I know printing your creative project can be confusing and stressful, but Mixum is here to make it easy. From their instant quote calculator to let you get as many quotes as you want for free to their 24-hour customer service support, Mixum is here to make sure your printing experience runs smoothly from start to finish. And right now, you can choose from a range of premium printing options and materials, and the company has also printed many successful Kickstarter campaigns. A bunch of them you have even heard about on this very show. And they currently offer services in the United States, Canada, Australia, and the UK. And Mixum can print and reach your audience anywhere in the world. So if you're ready to print smarter, not harder, head over to Mixum.com. And right now they are running a promotion where listeners of my show can drop my name, Andrew Davis, in the message tab of a current order to get a 5% discount on their first order. So that is mixam.com. Again, type my name, Andrew Davis, in the message tab of your current order to receive a 5% discount on your first order. And without further ado, I have with me comic creator Joseph Duis. Hopefully, I got that name right. A little bit
Yeah,
nervous about it. Not Davis, Duis.
yeah.
Hopefully, yeah, I wasn't going to mess it up that way. So, going back to the show.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for actually backing my Kickstarter campaign and helping making my show continue to happen for season three. And we were speaking a little bit off air, and it was a rough one. We're gonna leave it at that.
Yeah, no problem. Doing these doing these shows. I mean, it's such a service, and it's not like it's not like you have like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna spend all my free time making a show and not get paid, and I gotta survive. That's how I feel about it.
No, I appreciate it because it means a lot, and a little bit goes a long way. And my overhead's pretty cheap, and all the money's going back into the show, minus $12, which I used to buy me a six pack, which I needed considering that my January was insane. But
Yeah.
anyway, this is not about me. This is not about me, everybody, because you currently
Tell me
have
about you.
a Kickstarter going on with Two Eyed Tales magazine, Black and White Horror Collection, Man in Nature. And obviously, I stated it's on Kickstarter right now. And what is the basic premise of the story for those who don't know what this Kickstarter is and are hearing about it for the first time?
Well, Two Eyed Tales magazine is a collection of three black and white horror stories in the tradition of the 1970s horror comics magazines, and it's magazine format. The theme is kind of a civilization versus wilderness. Ever since people have moved into cities and settled, they've been afraid of wild animals and nature generally. So that's where we got legends like the Wendigo and the werewolf. And so we wanted to take that theme, and we have three stories that are um, by two different artists, Greg Warrencheck and Milana Ferris, who came back from the first two White Tales, which is a previous collection we did that is standalone. So you don't have to read both of them to understand what's going on.
So let's even talk a little bit about this because obviously black and white horror is not a new concept, and it's been around since the 1970s and probably even a little bit before then. And so, what was this like? Because it is old school in a lot of ways, and it is that sort of Marvel old school indie comics vibe that's going on. And where did you this idea even come from? Because it's not what is being done in horror by Boom Studios or other companies. It's kind of a throwback in a lot of ways, and it's kind of retro and kind of cool.
Yeah, it definitely is, and that's intentional. We even backdated the cover date on there a couple years. Hey, people ask me about that. Um, but yeah, so I read when Dark Horse had Creepy. I read that, and then I kind of read some of the original Warren stuff. I've read a lot of the Skywald black and white comics horror magazines from the '70s, which actually are public domain. Some of the few things from the '70s that are Nightmare, Psycho, Scream, and I actually kind of realized recently why they did that. It was to get around the comics code, so they published them as magazines and said, this is stuff that we can't do with the comics code, so we'll do it in magazine format. And those original ones, they also had stuff like sometimes they had like movie reviews and letter columns, and so it wasn't all comics, but it was like 90% comics. They were really comics. Um, so after I did the first two I Tales, I did a story, a 4-page story called "The Invisible Claw Monster from Outer Space." So it was this black and white, no dialogue story, 4 pages that was supposed to go into a different anthology that never went out. So it's like, I want to do some more two eyed tail stuff. So in order to publish a 4-page story, I wrote two other stories that were 32 pages total.
It's just the way it has to go, right?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, so one of them was in the first two tales we had a story called "Bless the Children," and there was a character who was on 2 pages, and of the 15-page story we never developed. So I wanted to do a story about his backstory that had been kind of bubbling in my mind for a while. So we published "Bless the Children" first in 2017 as a standalone, and then it was part of Two Tales in 2019. So it's been a few years, and I've been thinking about it. So he was a northern peyote Native American. So I did a lot of research into their mythology, and
Yeah, we're going to talk about this because
okay,
there's a lot of stuff going on with
yeah.
this.
Uh,
So
so
this is what it looks like, one of the
yeah,
pages, and this is another page.
yeah,
That's not another. That's a different one completely. I'm getting ahead of myself, but
yeah,
this is definitely a page from it.
yeah,
And it's interesting because you had Greg Warnachok, I'm probably getting his name wrong, come back on this, who did Bless the Children. And this is almost a prequel in a lot of ways to it. To some degree, it ties in. Maybe it's not a pure prequel, but it ties in,
yeah,
and it's sort of like 30 years ahead of it, and it kind of leads into it. And so, what is the story behind this? Because there's a lot of stuff going on with a traveling merchant, and he's seeing things, and it's horror based, and I don't know what's real, what's fake, what he's imagining. I don't know if he's schizophrenic, and it's all that stuff going on, and it's really interesting. And it's also the idea that it's done in the manga style, and you gotta rotate your book.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. So we did that with the first one. We did it in landscape, and then Two Eye Tales. We had that one landscape story, and the other rest were portrait orientation. So I did the same thing in this one. So we have the one landscape story and the two portrait stories. I did them in landscape because in the early 19th century, there were just a really handful of comics, and they were sort of in that landscape orientation, not exactly the same size, but in that landscape orientation. So I wanted to kind of keep it in that. But yeah, it's not like I said, it was not really like a straight prequel. They're not really related, the stories, but you kind of get more of a sense of who this guy is when he appears on 2 pages of Bless the Children, and how he got there, and because I mentioned in Bless the Children that he's without his tribe and he's on his own, and so wrote this story showing how that happened.
Yeah, because there's a lot of stuff in this story, and obviously I sort of tease a little bit of it, but it's also dealing with Northern Paiute folktale, and I might be getting that name wrong too, so I apologize. And you're blending that into this story, and then there's the horror aspect. So what was that like? Because I'm taking you're not necessarily an expert in that type of folktale, but getting to research it and then really transforming it and introducing elements of it. What was that like? Because it is something that I think isn't really explored all that much, and it makes the book different.
Yeah. So we see mythology and fiction used in fiction a lot. But I was kind of tired of seeing the same mythologies over and over. We see Greek, Roman, Norse, and in the U.S. when we get things imported from Japan, we see East Asian stuff too. But other than that, it's fairly rare that we see it. So since I already established this guy was a Northern Peyote, I went and read an entire book of folktales, the from their traditions, and so I worked mostly. It's based on the legend of Nuwuzohu, who was a cannibal giant, and he roamed the earth before the human people, and there were only animal people, and he he ate the animal people. So the rest of the animal people asked Coyote to go put a stop to him, and Coyote, according to one version of it, turns him into stone. And the northern coyote in Oregon, they said that that Nuwazohu is still there as stone, and you can still see his face there, and to a lesser extent some of his fingers. But the rock is now mostly referred to as Smith Rock, and it's kind of a climbing destination, vacation spot for people. But the indigenous people always called it Nuwazohu's face, and so that's what our story is based around, that real site. And so this is before permanent white settlement in the area. So that's that's the only name that it's known by at this point. And it's kind of interesting to write the story about people who believed in folk tales, but thought that that was a while ago, and magic was sort of gone now. Not totally, but in the past it was a very magical place, and there were animal people, and the animal people kind of devolved and became real animals. Um, but to write a story where you kind of have sort of these fantastic elements and there's no doubt about them, was kind of different for me. There's nobody showing up and saying this is irrational. There are characters who say to the main character, he finds out about a meteorite that's hit Nuwazohu's face, and his essence is leaking out, and all the wildlife becomes cannibalistic. They all hunger for human flesh. So he goes to seal the crack, and his wife and his brother track him down, and first they try to stop him, but then they're kind of talked into helping him. So it's up to these three to make it to the rock without being eaten alive by something or other.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff sort of happens. And as I was stating, we sort of see some wolf spirits in there. We see bugs crawling on them. Also, they're sort of going in, and there's that igloo scene in there as well, where they're almost building an igloo or implying that they're going to build an igloo, which is a really cool thing because that's actually how it's supposed to be done, which is a nice little touch. Where, in case anybody hasn't ever seen an Eskimo build an igloo on YouTube, it's one of the most fascinating YouTube videos ever. Spent like 20 minutes watching. I'm like, I was mind blown.
Yeah.
And it was tranquil and it was mind blowing.
Yeah.
But even that's a nice touch that it's actually factually accurate and it's paying, some respect. And that's something that I really appreciate about your book is that you didn't just gloss over a little tiny detail like that. And then also there's other things that are going on in this where he sticks his hand in what's supposed to be cold water and then it's like hot, and
Yeah.
you're really going down this path where
Yeah.
there's some real spirit stuff going on and you're touching upon some interesting things.
Yeah. I actually did some research, since I live in Colorado and live in Oregon. So I was doing some research about like what kind of animals would have been there then. So we kind of focused on some of the types of animals, and I wanted to give a good range. So we have aphids in there. We have a bear and birds. We have we have all kinds of animals in there. There's one panel where I just told Greg just to draw anything, just put as many different types of animals in there as you can. So it was really fun, and I think it kind of resonates, the idea of animals being dangerous. Like, it isn't necessarily that every animal is dangerous, but the idea that we think we understand nature, we think we know the rules, and we really don't. You know, we always think we have things figured out, and then it's not there. Whether it's your religious belief system or science, we don't really know. It's never something that nature. It's never something that we totally have figured out.
Yeah, and it also, I mean, and maybe I interpreted the entire thing because I got to read an advanced copy. And I'm going to preface that. I'm trying not to ruin too much, but I interpreted that nature is its own entity and it is rough out there too. And that while these animals to some degree are figuring out how to survive and they're able to cope, these three humans are not prepared for it.
Yeah.
It is a brutal, brutal area to be in. And not saying they were unprepared, but they weren't prepared enough in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. And, that's how I interpreted it. Maybe I have a different interpretation on how you wanted to write it. But like, I viewed it almost as man versus nature. And, well, nature's sort of winning the fight in
Yeah.
this issue. Like,
Yeah.
and it's a very interesting read. And I mean, it was a little bit hard because I had to like tilt my computer this way to read it, but then
Yeah.
that's not the point.
Yeah,
No,
the final one, yeah, the
no,
final one would actually be 2 PDFs. That's how we did the first one. So you won't have to turn your phone. Uh,
minus that, it was great.
yeah, maybe that's good. It makes you kind of feel disoriented while you're reading it. So
I thought my mom looked at me and she's like, "What the
yeah,
hell are you doing?"
uh,
It was a very funny moment in my life. Somebody should have taken a picture of how to read comics the correct way.
yeah, yeah,
But even going further into this, obviously Greg came back because he worked on Bless the Children. And what was this like having him back working for you and doing the art and knowing that you worked with him before and that I enjoyed Bless the Children because I read that before as well and really bringing him back into the fold and knowing how what he can draw and what he can unleash, but also doing a sort of manga black and white. I don't want to say raw comic, but it's got a raw grit feel to it as well.
yes,
And knowing that, you're saying, hey, I like the way you work and I'm happy that you want to continue to work with me. Because I would imagine it's a compliment when an artist is like, you approach an artist like, yeah, I want to be back in. Let's do it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I wanted both of them back to kind of give some continuity because they were the two artists in the first Two Tales. But also I just kind of wanted Greg back because the uh, the first story was kind of related to Bless the Children, and I wanted Malana back because I wanted to do well. First of all, he had already done the 4-page story for us, but I also wanted him to do the 10-page story for us because that takes place in Asia, and so I thought it was kind of cool to have like a manga style, kind of like the first one we had one in Japan that was in manga style. So
Yeah, no. And even talking about manga style, because obviously, and even going off of that, manga for the first time, I think last year overtook American comics in the way they were selling. And I understand it's a little, maybe not comics, but graphic novels is a better word to use per se. And obviously, manga is a very hot commodity right now where a lot of people like reading manga. I'm a big manga reader, and there's a lot of reasons why. But what is that like of you saying, hey, I see things writing on the wall, and if I have a manga style comic or even one in there, all of a sudden it's going to draw attention to it and it's done in the style of storytelling. It's done in the art style. It's done in the way it's black and white and minimal shading per se, and really going down that path. And was that just happening? Just so happened that manga's hot right now, or was it more saying, "Hey, I'm seeing what's going on, and let me get a little bit of that in there"?
I don't think it was about that so much. I do think that obviously manga's gotten very very popular in the United States. It was always popular in Asia, but yeah, it's gotten a lot more popular in the United States even than Western comics. I have been, when I was a kid, I'm old enough where we were not exposed to manga. We weren't exposed to anime. When we
You weren't hanging out in the right social circles.
yeah
It's
yeah
all right. It's all right. I'm 29, and that's the only thing I was exposed to.
yeah yeah no I'm tomorrow I'm gonna be 44, so um, it was before time, but yeah
You were hanging out with the cool kids.
yeah. So we when we heard about, I think I read actually the first manga I read was Akira. I read one of the volumes of Akira and I had no clue what was going on. And it was definitely not the first one. So then after that it was we started hearing about something called Japanimation and before we knew it was called anime. And one of my friends literally found on the side of the road a cardboard box full of VHS tapes and picked it up and showed it to us, and that was the first time we ever saw anime. It was stuff like Princess Mononoke, a couple other things probably, and we had never ever seen anything like that, and we were like 16, 17. We had never heard of it before. Uh, so I've gotten into manga pretty slowly. Um, so I kind of wanted to start where I was the most comfortable. So I started with horror manga, and I really like a lot of it. And so I kind of thought about it. And so the first two tales we kind of did in a manga format, where it was kind of small dimensions, and kind of as a nod to the horror manga. And I kind of like the idea of having stuff that takes place in Asia being a manga style. So that's really why I did it. Not because manga is more popular. Um, I think a lot of people are more comfortable with the manga format than I am, um, but I do like the idea of being in complete two different styles. And was at a con one time and I had the original Toy Tales, and I was like, yeah, I saw somebody walk by the table. I was like, hey, you read comic books? She said, no, I only read manga. And I said, well, one quarter of this is manga. And she didn't buy it, but it's just funny to me how we have kind of a separation between them. I don't think it necessarily needs to be there.
Yeah, I don't think it really needs to be there either. And I also think it's the idea that you can read. I'm gonna just drop a famous manga that everyone knows, One Piece or Dragon Ball Z, because I'm wearing my Majin Buu shirt. But you could read Dragon Ball Z and you could still read another comic like Batman, and there's room for both. And I just think that you don't have to pick a side with this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You could just say this story is good or this story is bad. Who cares the format? And you could also say, look, Dragon Ball Z wouldn't work as a comic book. It just doesn't. It works as a manga. It works as an anime. You can't have an American cartoon of Dragon Ball Z. You just can't. It doesn't work in that fashion. But it works in a certain medium. And I think that that's something that people really need to sort of check out at the ego. And if you go into Barnes and Noble, and I've done this, I bought a graphic novel, a manga, and a novel, all in the same outing. And then I
yeah,
bought a bunch of stuff on Amazon while I was in Barnes and Noble that had nothing to do with that. That's not the point here. But it's like you don't have to pick a side, and I don't get that. And I don't get why everybody thinks there has to be. Blows my mind. But anyway, I digress. This is not
yeah.
about
Um,
convincing people whether manga or comics are better.
yeah. I mean, I take the Scott McCloud definition, and I bring up Scott McCloud, and people like younger people like, who is that? But I forgot that it was like 20 years ago when they came up with Understanding Comics Now. But Scott McCloud says if it's pictures and they're in sequence, then it's a comic. It could be a cave painting. It could have dialogue. It could not have dialogue. It could have words. It could have no words. They could be left to right. They could be up and down. And actually, in Reinventing Comics, is saying like, if it's digital and it's like you click on one panel to get to the next panel, that's also sequential. It doesn't have to be printed. There's really nothing really special about the idea of it being on paper. So I always take that definition where like, and people will argue with me, like people get in fights with me all the time, like manga. What's the difference between manga and comics? Yeah, there are tropes that are common to either style, but they're not exclusive. And I think that it seems kind of weird to put them in separate categories. I pick up a Sandman, then I pick up Death Note, and it's the same.
Yeah, I read a lot of stuff, and I'm a big digital comic reader. I have a Comixology subscription, and I don't view my digital comic inferior to a print comic. I
Yeah,
also
yeah,
pick up print comics, but the reason why I have a digital subscription to Comixology, and whether you like Amazon or not, that's not the point here. It's the idea that I'm not going to go and pick up 48 issues of Sonic the Hedgehog when I legitly want to chill out on my Saturday and read it for 6 hours and it's convenient. Or Zenoscope has a big library. I'm a huge Zenoscope fan. And that's the thing about digital for me is that it's just there. And
Yeah.
for me to buy it would be way more expensive than $6.37. Not to mention, I'm going to have to store it. And that's the bigger problem for me. But again, I agree where if it's pictures, words, and in an order,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just comics to me, and whatever you call it, you call it. I don't really care as long as I get to read it. But that's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
But that's some people, you can fight me on it, everybody. I don't mind.
No, that's all right.
Right,
Sure.
after my Kickstarter experience, I am ready. That was
Uh,
training ground, guys. That was training ground. You know,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
fighter boot camp before they go into the fight into the octagon. I mean, this is what Ronda Rousey needs to go through to get back into UFC. If she could survive my January, she'll be champ in no time.
Yeah.
In no time.
Yeah. Well, toughens you up, I guess. Uh,
Maybe I
but
should call Ronda Rousey and put her through a Kickstarter like I went through. And we'll see. We'll see how tough she gets. She might
yeah.
break in week 2.
Yeah. Yeah. Every Kickstarter is a little rough though. So, um,
I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
yeah.
You know that this is gonna be clipped out and tweeted right sent to her. You and me both. We're gonna get so many views. It's gonna be
Yeah.
great. This is the TikTok moment
Yeah.
of the interview. But anyway, if we're gonna have a TikTok moment, we might as well sell a bunch of your books, right?
Yep.
Might
Exactly.
as well get you massively funded. So it's
Yeah.
see, this is what happens when people pay me to be on my show. Like
Yeah.
we
Exactly.
wound up talking about your book and we wound up getting you funded. That's the goal here. But I do want to talk about the second book, which out of the bunch, and I'm gonna be very, very honest, I actually enjoyed the second one the most. And your second story, which is The Pure of the Void or The Purr of the Void.
Yeah. The Pearl of
And
Wood. Yeah.
this was super, super interesting, actually. And obviously, it's dealing with a lot of stuff, and it's an interesting take on werewolves, where werewolves are sort of attacking people, and then they're also massively committing suicide. And it's a little bit more complicated than that, where there's a curse with werewolves and a variety of other things going on. And it's almost like you become a werewolf and you can't beat the curse and you got to go bite people and kill them and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And the only way to get out, and sorry for ruining it slightly, everybody, is to commit suicide. And where
That's
did
on page one, so we didn't ruin it. Yeah.
because where did that idea come from? Because it is so interesting, and it is a different book.
Yeah.
I mean, I read the description and then I read it on your
Um,
paper. I'm like,
that's
what?
just page one it describes. Yeah, and then there's 9 more pages. Yeah, but it's I wanted to do a werewolf story that was different. You know, the idea of werewolves is kind of the fear of wolves. People who live kind of in rural areas and they're afraid of wolves coming and eating the sheep and maybe attacking small children or whatever. And that's kind of where it came from. But I was like, I want to do a werewolf story because I've done different types of monsters, but like, let's do a werewolf story, but it's not going to have werewolves in it. Like, let's do a werewolf story that's um, completely different. So instead of, and one of the things I thought of was like, what if it's a werewolf story that's in like a huge metropolis instead of like on the outskirts of society? And the werewolf only eats people. It doesn't eat animals or defenseless babies. It eats people. That's what it has a taste for. So if you're in a city and you're eating people, a lot of people disappear in big cities, and nobody ever finds them. There's so many people to eat. So I kind of thought about like and also if you're in a big city, people are not very superstitious. They're not going to believe you if you say you're involuntarily turning into, in this case, a leopard, um, and eating people. So I also wanted to kind of pay homage to the lycanthropy myths and folklore rather than more of the cinematic version. So we have the lycanthropy being the result of an actual curse. Um, Instead of more modern interpretations kind of see it as a parallel for infectious disease. But originally people didn't really have a conception of disease like that. So I wanted to be more of a sense of um, you know nature and sort of people's feral nature taking over involuntarily. And so I use the idea of a sorcerer kind of cursing the main character to become a leopard at night and kill people. And I also wanted to make sure that he remembered doing it. So a lot of times in werewolf fiction, you see people who turn into werewolves and they wake up, they have no idea what happened, and they don't believe they're really the werewolf because they have no memory of it. Um, so in this case, he remembers everything he does, but he has no control over it. So,
Oh,
so
it's
that's
so interesting. It
yeah,
really is. Where I mean, you could read this on multiple levels in a lot of ways, and I think you wrote it that way. And if you didn't, and it's a happy accident, that's even better in a
yeah,
lot of ways. But you're a good writer, so I know how you wrote it. It's one of the things where he remembers what he did, and then it's how do you live with yourself with what you did. Then you try to fight against what you did because you know what you did is wrong, but you didn't get caught. And at least your subconscious or this leopard or whatever you're turning into is smart enough not to get caught, right? And so then you remember what you did. You then say, I can't do that again. You try to fight it, try to prevent it, try to protect yourself, try to make sure you're good. And then you can't fight it. And then you still remember what you did, and it's over and over and over again. And then you got the psychological aspect, and you also have the horror. How far am I going to go as this entity? And it's really brilliant in a lot of ways because this is not traditional by definition. And you can read it on that level, or you can just read it saying, I'm turning into a wolf killing people. Yeah, it would
yeah,
just be very simple, or you could take my approach and make it massively psychological. And what is that like? Because it's multiple levels, and you could go anywhere in between as well.
yeah. Some something else is I wanted it to really be kind of not really about werewolves so much as about suicide. The reason it takes place in Sri Lanka is because, but at the time the story took place in 2017, there was kind of a big rash of suicides in Sri Lanka per capita. It was probably the biggest rate of suicide in the world. I thought about that, and that's why I said it in Sri Lanka, and but I also wanted to kind of show that Sri Lanka is not like this backward place. It's cosmopolitan. It has a lot of new infrastructure. Um, People take the train, and so I thought about all of the commuter train infrastructure in Colombo, and um, there's sort of multiple aspects that tie into that. Like on page one, he's going to throw himself in front of the train. Um, I wanted to show how to kind of like the tragedy of suicide and how people kind of feel like they're such horrible people that they can't go on, that they can't control their impulses.
Yeah, and then obviously it's even that conscious position where, and maybe I didn't even think he was so horrible. I just think he wanted to end the pain with it, and he wanted to get out of this curse. And he's like, I gotta stop this problem because it happened because he was a witness, and then the curse sort of passed on to him what he was becoming, and then he goes and he throws himself in front of a train, and while he's out of it, because obviously he's dead, and this thing is sort of a parasite slash a curse, it jumps into a new person, and the cycle continues, and the cycle repeats to some degree, and it's this idea that at least you're dealing with that, and the suicide for me was actually almost a mercy kill, and I viewed it very differently. And then again, I viewed this entire thing on a whole different level. And most people, and I might be corrupting people who listen to it, but that's something that I think is so interesting about this story is that it leaves a boatload of interpretation because you could view it that he couldn't live with himself anymore, or you could view it that he wanted out and he said, I got to break this curse and I got to do the just thing in a lot of ways. And maybe I'm a political science major, and maybe that's my background to view it, but that's something that I just thought was very interesting. And I don't know if that was the intention or.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely the intention. And when the cultist curses him, I'm not giving too much away, but when the cultist curses him, she has to give the last of her life force to do that. She has to die to give the curse to him. So to me, that's kind of a parallel of the cluster effect you see with suicides, where one of your friends kills himself, and then you think about doing it. So that's also why he doesn't pass on the curse to others when he bites them, because the curse really is the suicide. Like that's kind of the way I was thinking about it. It's not a traditional where it's a disease where he's infecting other people. He personally is the only one doing it. He's the only one who turns into a leopard and kills people. So that kind of makes him feel even worse that he's the only one that's doing this.
Yeah, and it creates a whole nother thing where you're alone and you're isolated, and then you're like, what am I doing here? And I'm killing people, and I'm the only one who's killing it. I don't have a clan, and you're one is a lonely number, right?
Yeah.
And two could be just as bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Three get you a copy strike on YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like it's really really interesting because again it's multi layers, and what I like about it is that I think, what is this, like 10 pages or even less?
Yeah. 10 pages. Yeah.
And so it's very interesting because there's clear a very short window for you to write this, and there's not a lot of dialogue, there's not a lot of panels. I mean, what is there at most? 40 panels, over 10 pages at most. And what is that like? Because you wrote a complete story, and you could have gone, I mean, we could have, and I would imagine that you could have gone at least another 15, 20 pages if you wanted to some degree. But what is that like to really write in a short facet? Because it is nice when you write short.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm a little biased, but it's easier for me to write shorter stories than harder than longer stories. And I think doing these, I'm doing this book, and I'm probably doing about three more short story collections after I get done with this one. It was almost kind of like a palate cleanser because I just did Receipt of Dracula, and that was like 112 pages altogether. And it was a really hard book, three books for me to write because um, there's so many moving parts when it's longer, and you kind of have to move stuff around, and if you move something, it might break something else. And um, so when I did this story, I just said, I'm just going to keep it for however as short as it needs to be. So it didn't go into like a ton of detail on it. But at the same time, just kind of give enough so that you can understand the layers of it, and have it be just done after 10 pages. I actually was just thinking about this earlier today, where the whole idea of lycanthropes in a city. Like, I think you could probably do like entire series of comics about that. About you could make it a parallel about urban mismanagement and homelessness and all that kind of stuff. But you know for right now, this is it for right now. So
This is so interesting because I love to write short, and maybe I'm a little bit spoiled where I haven't written an article in a while, but I love to stay between 600 and 1,000 words, which is not a lot for an article. I love to stay under 1,000, and I love to stay under 800. And I have all these articles that I would write, and they're like 750 words, and it's a page, maybe a page and a quarter, and I just want to get it out there, and like every word matters and every sentence matters. And it is an art form to be able to write short, because I'm like, hey, people have short attention spans. People want to read something really, really quickly. And I don't want to give who, what, when, where, and how, but I want to give saying, hey, here's what happened. Here's my opinion on it. And that's kind of, so I give a 4 sentence, intro. I kind of give a summary of what happened, and then I give why this show matters or why this anime was great. And it's pretty concise downward. And then even when I was working for the government a while ago, I was writing 5-page reports on legitimately compiling probably anywhere from 70 to 200 pages worth of documents. And I really enjoy the idea of shortness because time is unlimited. And so, but I also feel like it's a lost art where we have these big stories, and I'm not going to go put anything on blast, but actually we could go, I think it's fair to say that Batman, 50 issues of Batman on a Batman run, that's a lot of content. both on expenditure, investment. I mean, 50 issues is what, 4 years, give or take?
Yeah.
That's a commitment. I mean, that's like a marriage.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And so I'm curious how you feel about all that, and even just that art being lost. Like, I want like an issue, a complete issue, and that's the end of the Batman story. Because like that's where I'm at, is that my attention span is like dwindling. I mean, I got 7 seconds, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, yeah, I mean, I work for government now too. I've been there for 17 years, almost. And if I ever wrote any report that was more than 2 pages, it would probably have been one in a million, you know.
They keep you to 2 pages. They kept me to 5.
I mean, there's not like a limit, but you know,
I want your
by the
job,
time it
man.
goes through by the time it goes through all the revisions, there's about a paragraph and a half left, you know.
I want your job. If I could write a paragraph and a half on reports, I mean, come on.
It
That's
doesn't
great.
start at 2 pages though. But yeah, but yeah.
You're living the dream.
Um, so you know, I think I've had practice with that. But it's funny because you see people who other comic creators who go, oh yeah, you know, I'm going to start and I'm going to do a whole universe and I'm going to do 75 issues or whatever. And you're like, all right, like let's just like start with a
Get
4 page,
one.
you know,
One.
yeah, yeah, not even one issue,
First issue.
4 pages, 8 pages, you know, see if you can do that. Because it's easier to stretch it out than it is to compress it. And it's funny because when I revise my own scripts, I tend to make them longer, which is probably the opposite of what most people do. Uh, but uh, but I kind of look at it like when I wrote the first story on this, a pleasant walk to the cannibal giant space. It was 20 pages, and I kind of stretched it out a little bit and made some things breathe a little better. And then the same thing with the second one, which is 8 pages, and then it went to 10. So you know, I feel like if I add a couple pages to it when I do a million revisions on it, it isn't necessarily terrible. If it's too long and I can't cut it down, then it's really bad. So you know, because you got to
It's
figure out
so
like where
interesting.
am I supposed to cut? Yeah,
This is
and
so interesting because I'm the opposite, and I used to be the opposite in a lot of ways. Where I used to write a lot of long stuff, and then my mom would freaking take like an axe to it, and like, and it would go that way. And I've been trained to write short, and years and years and years of that. It's very helpful because if you can make your point in a paragraph, why should I waste anybody's time? And I understand that from a monetization, and there's other things where if you're writing for a magazine or a website, there's ads on it. You need content. I get that
yeah,
component of it, but as far as just information or storytelling, I mean, if I could tell my comic in a page, why should I not do that? Because if I could tell and then the punchline, I don't know if you heard my interview with Steve Tanner, but he had a comic that was a page and it was 9 panels. And by the middle of the panel, the guy in it understands that he is going to die when you turn the page. That is a brilliant, brilliant comic. You cannot, but that story was 9 panels and he's fearing for his life, begging you not to turn the page. And if you could tell a story in 9 panels, I mean, that is the ultimate short of a comic. I don't think you can get any shorter than that in reality.
yeah,
I mean, I'm sure somebody could do something in like 3 panels if they wanted to,
yeah,
but in a comic book style,
yeah.
I mean that's a complete story, and it's just a lost art. I feel, and
Yeah, yeah, I do think so. But I mean, I love comic strips. Like that was something that I read a lot when I was a kid too. It was just, you know, you got 3 or 4 panels and you finished it up. You know,
hey, Sunday was a good day in my
yeah,
house.
yeah,
I had to read the newspaper.
you have
You
more
know,
comics on Sunday. Yeah, and you know what was funny is I hated stuff like Prince Valiant. You know, and you're like, what's going on? And like, I have no clue. You know, and there's like 2 panels. One is like huge and lavishly illustrated. The other one's pretty small and nothing happens, you know. And and I'm like, you know, like I can read Blondie and they got 4 panels and they're smaller than these 2 panels and they got more dumb than Prince Valiant, you know. Not that I dislike Prince Valiant, but but reading it in a daily format or a weekly format, even worse, is just awful. But yeah, like I think especially for indie comics, that people don't know when the next issue is going to be out. That's just a reality. So if you can do one story and have it be self-contained, or in my case, 3 or 4 stories, have them be self-contained, I think that's a virtue. You know, and like we just talked about this 10-page story for a long time. It doesn't mean that this story is not complex. It doesn't mean that it doesn't.
Well, it's more complex.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard the song "How to Write a Love Song" by the Four Chords of Axis, or the Axis of Awesome. There's a line where one of the guys is quiet for the entire song, and he's like, "I've been quiet this entire time, girl, and it doesn't mean I love you any less. In fact, it means I love you even more."
Yeah.
And what's really funny about the line is
Yeah.
that it's just so out of nowhere, and that's what I think is. I think a shorter story in a lot of ways can be complex, more complex than a longer story, because if I have 150 pages to tell you a whole story about a werewolf who basically became cursed and is slowly killing people, and we go through every single person he's killed, and he finally kills himself to end the curse, well, that's great. But if I can do that in 10 pages, that means I need to invoke emotion in every single panel. And I need to get down and get into somebody's psyche and my reader's psyche to make them understand. And I got 3 panels to get them into the state of the mind to understand. I got like another 4 panels to get them up to the brevity of the situation. And then I have to go and basically build out the rest of the plot. And I got 8 more pages to do that, more or less. And that's a very complicated thing to do. And you don't have any more room to do it. That's a hard story to write in a lot of ways. And it's very complicated because in order to do that, you have to hit so many moving parts.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to sell your book, man. I'm trying to sell your book.
I actually remember when I came on here the first time, I think it was 2018, and we were talking about Dr. Orange, or maybe it was later, but we were talking about Dr. Orange. And like, yeah, there's no, you don't waste any time at the beginning of this book. The first page, she carves the jack-o'-lantern, and then that's it. Everything, we just go from there, and that's a 22-page story. Um, but yeah, I thought about that, and actually, every time I'm thinking about like how long do I make a story, I think about that time when you told me that, and you say like, yeah, we just get into the story. We don't have to have a background for this character, nothing. We just get to it.
You don't need anything. We're in and we're hitting the mission and going. Right? There's no first gear in this car.
That's why we got the guy trying to kill himself on page 1. Just start with something.
I mean, that's how I want to write. I just want to write where like the crisis just happens, and so like a nuke bomb goes off, and now what? Because that's a fun story, right? Because it's like, oh, we don't know the military, we don't know who these characters are.
Yeah,
we got to deal with it, and we're off to the races.
Yeah.
Really.
I kind of like that where you're telling a story and you kind of get little hints about the character, throughout the story instead of kind of spending a lot of time on background. Like in Dr. Orange, Dr. Orange is kind of a sad story in a lot of ways, but the thing that really hit me, just even when I was making it, the only thing that really hit me, because I'm not very sympathetic to my characters. Like I just kind of like,
oh yeah,
I screw them over all the time.
Characters.
Yeah,
love them. They're really nice to them.
but in Dr. Orange, I added something on at the lettering stage about she knew how to get blood stains up off the floor because she tried to kill herself before, and that was like an aside she makes in her internal monologue. And I just felt really bad for her in that moment. I was like, wow, I just made this character like a lot more sad.
Freaking took that character from like a level 4 sad to like a level 10.
yeah, it's bad enough that a jack-o'-lantern's trying to kill you, but if you have this tragic background, that's what really gets me.
You're not nice to your characters.
Yeah.
Remind me to never ever make myself a character in your book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't want to do that.
It's a
What,
terrible idea.
what one of my favorite authors is James Elroy. I don't know if you're familiar with his stuff.
Oh, I might know a title. I just don't recognize the name.
He's a crime fiction writer, but he comes from this really dark place. His mother, when he was 10 years old, was strangled to death with her own pantyhose, and he identified the body as a 10-year-old kid. And they never found the murderer. And so his stuff is just really really dark. And he did an interview, and people were asking, and his characters are just really awful, awful, awful people. And he did an interview, and they said, like, yeah, we know these characters are kind of bad people, but you don't really judge them. And he goes, no, I definitely judge them. I judge them on every page. I think they're terrible. So when I put them through bad things, I don't feel bad about it. and I just thought that was great, because everybody says, like, oh yeah, my character's kind of a terrible person, but you see it from their perspective, and yeah, that's true to an extent.
I mean,
But
I've openly said,
yeah,
and I've gotten into fights with Facebook. I say I judge people all the
yeah,
time, no question. Now I judge people at cons when they're in the ATM line. I judge them there, and I
yeah,
purposely walk through a con and I will laugh at everybody in that ATM line at a convention. I will also judge people who use credit cards at cons.
yeah,
There's and then I got into some pretty hefty fights, and like 50 people were really angry at me and saying, "Why
yeah,
are you judging people? I don't judge people." I'm like, You do. Everybody judges people. I'm
yeah,
just brave enough to admit it."
yeah.
And
And I think that's our capacity as humans. We need to judge people. In fiction, we can present people, and we can say, um, I'm going to punish this character who's awful, or we can say I'm going to punish this character who did nothing wrong. Like Chamendra in the second story, he really is a really good person.
that's what
And
makes it so good, though, is that he's a good person and he
yeah,
did the right thing and he got shellacked
yes,
and he
he
got
did.
he got basically screwed
Yeah,
and got fucked over. I mean, I don't know how to put that any other way, and I think it gets to the point
yeah,
where that also raises questions. And I mean, if you're not reading this and you're not saying, "What the fuck just happened?" How like it has to raise some level of your mind has to go to that place. Now, you might not have the F word in your vocabulary when you're reading this per se, but that person just got wronged is another way to put it, or they just got screwed hard.
yeah.
That's it's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely a good message, because I do both kinds of stories. Like, I do characters where innocent people are punished for things, and I do stories where guilty people are punished for things. And I think the message of that is, like, look, sometimes things don't go your way. It's not your fault. Doesn't mean you did the bad. Doesn't mean you did the wrong thing. You did everything you could. Sometimes things are going to go bad either way. Um, but yeah, so I mean, you can do that. You can do one or the other. But is what's interesting to me is that the way that I judge it, maybe the character as I'm writing, isn't necessarily the same way that the reader is going to. And I think that especially with comics, which is a visual medium, just show what the character's doing. You can certainly use internal monologue, which is we did in the second story. But I tend to use it pretty rarely, um, rather than have the character kind of say I'm a good person or a bad person. Just kind of show what the character's doing, and people will decide for themselves. I think that what the reader brings to the comic is really interesting to me, because it's almost like an interactive process where you might get something different than what I intended, or
It's yeah,
you
what
might,
I was yeah.
yeah,
Continue. Sorry.
yeah, or you might get something out of it that I did intend but I forgot, or I did intend but I didn't do it consciously.
So this is what I was going to add is that comics are a very interesting medium. Is that I can't necessarily control where the story starts and when the story ends because that is the writer. It's on the page, and in any media that I don't create, I can't control that. But what I can control is I can control the level of fear, the level of intent a character is reading something, how fast they're reading, how much time goes by. I mean, I can interpret in the second story if he's killing that person every night or every other night. I can have certain saying, oh man, he's going through these thoughts in a matter of an hour, or he's going through these thoughts in a matter of 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
And I can have those, thoughts where I control the speed that things are going in. Unless there's dates, but even still in those, I still can control. Unless you say this happened at 12:01, happened at 12:02, and you have a comic that's going minute by minute by minute,
Yeah.
then I have control over that, and that's a very different thing. So you could read this under the presumption that maybe this happened where he's killing somebody every other day, maybe he's killing somebody every night, maybe he's killing somebody random days out of the week when he's just hungry or when he's really transforming, and then it's just accelerating. There's a lot of control I have as a reader that can also change the interpretation. And so you might have said, hey, this took place all in a week. I could read this took place over months and months and months. And that gives a different interpretation because I can expand it or narrow it depending on how I feel as an individual. So that's something that's very interesting as far as a reader goes. And comics are one of the only mediums that you can do that in.
Yeah. Going back to Scott McCloud, like, when you're something that if you're coming from a cinematic background and you're going into comics and you want to draw comics, something that people make a mistake when they do that is that they think you need to draw every frame. That you don't need to do that because the reader is going to fill in what happens in between. So, and not everyone's going to do it the same way. And I really like that about it. And I always say about horror comics is that certain types of things that you can do in horror movies to scare the audience you cannot do in comics, because the reader controls the speed at which to read the comic. You also don't have things like a soundtrack. Um, you also have people who might pick up the comic in the morning on the way to work, not finish it, go to work, and come back and read the rest. People don't really do that with movies if they're in the theater anyway. Um, so so you have to rely on different tools, and I think it's really important to keep the medium in mind. You know, to me, if you're doing a horror story in a comic, it's really more about building the tension over time, and having things escalate over time. And the exact time frame of it is often not important, like you just said. But I like the idea of the reader kind of, judging this situation differently depending on how much time they have read into it. If Chimendra decides to kill himself after 24 hours and not finding a solution, he kind of looks like an idiot. If he's done it over months, he looks like he might actually be at the end of his rope and has just decided that he's done with it.
Or even in a week, if
Yeah.
he might be that it's so bad that there is no other solution and he's tried,
Yeah.
and that after 7 killings he can't live with himself anymore, and it's not a matter of a solution. He's like, I've done horrible things and this is the only way out, and this is the only form of repentance. And that's another level where that's also the idea, or you're in such pain and it's very, very complicated, and it's such a cool idea, and it changes, and there's a million things. And I think that we could have gone through this entire story live on this show and read it page for page, and everybody could have had a different interpretation of it. And that's what makes that story in particular amazing. Because, and I think it's just underrated. I think anybody who reads this and picks this up is going to say, oh, snap. Like, this is a story I can come back to at different points in my life and different interpretations of. And it's very, very important. I think that people understand that. But there is one more story I want to talk about.
Yeah. Sorry.
And this is the scariest of them all. And I must say, your writing on this one was off the charts. The dialogue was amazing. And
No dialogue.
Invisible Claw Monster from Outer Space. And it's a 4-pager. And some of your best dialogue ever.
Yes, exactly.
And we're going to leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a laser.
No. We're done. We're out of time, everybody. I'm sorry.
Didn't name any of the characters. There's only one character. Didn't bother to create more characters.
I mean, there's technically two, but
Yeah, all
that's
right.
not the point.
Um, and part of it is showing what's on TV. So it's very lazy. Um,
Oh, it's absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
so it's actually funny. I don't talk about this too much, but this was inspired directly by a Minnie Mouse story. So there is a Halloween Disney character board book that I read to my kids when they were littler, and it's one of those things where it's like there's a bunch of scary stuff, but it's not really anything scary. It's nothing, you know. Um, so they keep hearing all these noises and stuff, and they finally go and it's like it's nothing. But I thought about it, was like, this story could have been so much better, So so I rewrote it so it was a little scarier, without giving too much away about it. Only had 4 pages, so I guess I could have made it longer, but I just decided 4 pages is enough. I actually wrote this for a different anthology that never went out. But I just said, like, let's just get in and out of it and make it scary. Have a scary ending, and then just stop there. So kind of
I'll give you a term. I don't know if you know what this term means. Do you know what a stinger is?
what?
A stinger.
I don't think so.
Stinger.
No.
A stinger is a tattoo term where it's a tattoo that you should bang out in 15 to 20 minutes. So, for instance, a little bat symbol. So, I want a little bat symbol right here, stinger.
Yeah.
And that's the idea of it. Or it's also known as a banger, where you bang it in, you bang it out, right? That's what this is. So, at cons, I refer to it and say, hey, you could throw a little stinger on it, which is just a tiny little remark, right? Doesn't take the artist a hell of a lot of time, or a writer can do it, right? It's like
Yeah.
drawing a smiley face, right? So,
Yeah.
if you're a writer at a Comic Con, you could draw a bat symbol on somebody's book, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be perfect. It takes you 5 seconds, but it counts as a sketch, which is cool.
Yeah.
And so it changes the nature of a book in a lot of ways. It adds anywhere from $10 to $50 depending on the artist. But the idea is that that's what this is that this is a stinger where you're in 4 pages, you're out, and you're not spending a fuck ton of time banging it out. It's not all that complicated of a story, but it gets the job done.
Yeah. We were talking about short stories before. I don't know if you read any of the DC, the red Superman Red and Blue, or Batman Black and White, or
I've read some of Red and Blue.
yeah, there's
I
another
enjoy
one
Red
that,
and Blue.
yeah, and then Marvel's done like Elektra and Deadpool, and those ones where they have like one color and everything else black and white. Um,
They did that with
those,
Red Sonja too.
yeah, yeah,
Those were cool covers, by the way.
man. It even not taking the coloring thing into account, which I thought was really cool. Um, those comics are some of the best comics I've read in years. I mean, those stories. When I think about superhero comics, and that's what I grew up on. I think about superhero comics, and the most memorable ones that I've read. It is not Watchmen. It's just 12 issues. It's not Dark Knight Returns. It's the issue in which Superman saves a guy from committing suicide, and it only takes one issue. And then in these red and blue books, or the black and white or yellow and whatever they're called. I think Wonder Woman's like gold and black and gold. Um, but in these stories, they take the essence of the character and they just finish it within 8 or 10 pages. And these characters are so iconic. You do not need to explain who they are. You don't need to have a 12 issue storyline. You just get in and out, and you get to the essence of the character, and that's kind of what I was doing. This is kind of get to the essence of horror. Like, what is it about horror that really works? And that's what I was trying to do on 4 pages.
Yeah, no, it's very, very important in a lot of ways, and I think that you really sort of get into that because I don't really need to be told what scares me. I need to be told how it scares me, if that makes sense. And I think that that's something that, you've done really well. And obviously, though, I do want to highlight your rewards for all this stuff because I'm not too sure how much time we got. So I want to make sure that I at least tell people what they can actually get. And we have pictures. Um, and so obviously there's a bunch of stuff, and I could probably talk to you for the next hour all about your book and break down the psychology of it. But this is the physical copy of the book. I think this is cover A. I think this is cover B. I think that this is another cover. I want to say it's a giant size.
Yeah.
And then this is sort of the retro, I think, of the first one. And obviously there's a bunch of other stuff out there. There's obviously you can get all the physical stuff. You can get everything physical. I think you could add on the retro cover. There's also just the basic digital. There's the digital catch up from the first, you know, two eye tails
Yeah.
magazine. It took me a minute. I was looking at those. I'm like, oh, there it is, perfect.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and then there's also you can get drawn in the comic, which you may or may not want to do because according to you don't treat your characters nicely.
I have one guy every campaign I do. I have one guy who always backs that, and he always wants to be killed every time. So it's fine.
Just you should just deny him once. Just deny him once.
Well, I had him drawn into Crusader Dracula book 3, and the scene didn't really call for dead bodies, so I have him as part of the Order of the Dragon when they're about to assault the palace in Istanbul. So I said to him, I was like, "You're not technically dead, but you're about to assault the palace in Istanbul, and you're probably going to be killed pretty quickly because the guards will kill you." Um, so that was that. I talked him into that. So
See, I find it funny in which that there are companies that you get a certain amount of points in their loyalty program. They write you in and then they might kill you off. I think that's funny. I think it's hilarious. If I'm gonna do something, I want to die in a comic book. I just think it's funny.
yeah,
I don't know why it's funny, but it is.
yeah. I don't know. That's funny either.
Then what you really do is that you then after you get yourself killed, you buy it and then you get your friends killed off
Yeah,
because that's funnier. And then you
yeah,
give
yeah,
them as a gift. Be like,
yeah. You
this
get
is what I
somebody
think
else
of you,
for it.
man.
Yeah,
You just hand the book, you plop it down, you open up the page, see you, you're dead, and then
yeah,
you just leave.
yeah, yeah. No, yeah. That's. I mean, you can do that.
I'm a
That's
great friend. I really am.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had somebody who was like, yeah, I don't want to have my stuff in there. I'm gonna have my grandkid in there, or I'm gonna have my kid in there, or whatever.
See,
Um,
see, see, the joke for me gets funnier because my two best friends, they're twins. So if you kill off one of them, how does the other feel?
yeah,
Now that's a messed up joke.
yeah,
That's a messed up joke
yeah,
in so many ways.
yeah,
And then this is the joke that's gonna get you and me canceled.
yeah,
And not in the way people think either, because
yeah. Well,
someone's gonna hear this joke and they'll be like, "I get it." Like
yeah,
30 minutes later.
yeah, yeah,
Now that clearly I got you and me both kicked off the internet.
yep,
But even going in all seriousness though, you can get drawn into the book, and it's actually a very good tier. Don't be dissuaded by me and my foolishness. Actually, go get drawn into the book, and you can get killed. I think you can live. You can do something else in the book. You could just be there,
yeah.
and
I think in this specific one, you are hanging out at Animal Village with the animal people. So
yeah. You can make some new friends.
yeah,
You can never have enough friends. Is all I'm
yeah,
gonna say. And in my world, we don't discriminate against anybody or any animal, except bees terrify me. So if you put me next to a bee,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. No, thank you. I
Yeah,
prefer not to have honey.
yeah. Yeah, we had a referendum about gray wolves when I was voting, and I like, yeah, should we reintroduce gray wolves to our county? And I was like, hell no,
That
and
would have been a
I had no
really
reason for
funny.
saying that. I
That
just,
that would have been so funny if you made that as like a tier and as
yeah,
a poll at the end of the Kickstarter. Because if that was a poll, I would have backed $1 just so I could vote.
yeah,
I would have back on an extra vote for
yeah.
another $1.
And it was funny because it's like one of those things. I think it actually ended up passing, but it's one of those things where it's like the ecology of the region is disrupted. There's all these mountain lions and crap around, and and it's because the gray wolves went extinct, and then they were like a chain reaction. So they're like they wanted to put the gray wolves back in, but the only thing I could think of was like, we've already got coyotes in this neighborhood. We've already got mountain lions. Do I need something else that could like carry off my kids like? And like that was like my whole thinking of it. Like I didn't think about it at all. Um, but it's just like this book. It's about wild animals. Like the first thing you think of is like I want to be eaten.
Hey, hey, hey! There are worse ways to go.
Yeah, yeah. I guess there are. Yeah,
I mean. You know what it is? If it says in my obituary, you got carried off and taken out by gray wolves, and that's my obituary. It's a
yeah,
pretty good
yeah. That sounds pretty
obituary.
good. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, what else could be better? I mean,
yeah,
if you're gonna have a circumstance, you know, he died of natural causes. Not saying that's bad, but people are gonna remember you got killed by a gray wolf. You're gonna be like, oh yeah, that Andrew guy got killed by a gray wolf. Let me go read his comic now.
yeah,
Like he died of natural causes. I'm not gonna read his comic.
yeah. They leave out that it was rabies, though.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. If you have to pick one or the other, and you don't have a choice about death, you might as well pick the cool one. I'm just saying. It's a really morbid conversation,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. That's the way it goes with these comics.
Hey, 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 hey! It's uncensored hour with me.
Yeah.
This is what happens at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny because I say our comics are PG-13, and they really are.
Oh, these conversations are not.
Yeah, the conversations are not. Um, but yeah, I mean, but if you look, so technically it's like, yeah, it's PG-13. There's no language, there's no nudity, there's no adult situations. There's hardly any gore. Um, so yeah, I have people whose kids, who will back it just for their kids and their teenage kids, and the kids will be like, yeah, these comics are awesome. You need to get it next time. And it's funny to me because I didn't think about them being PG-13 when I wrote them. I was like, these are definitely for adults. But yeah, teenagers tend to like them too, and it's just completely accidental to
I
PG.
mean that's interesting because I find them that they're adult topics and
Yeah,
adult concepts where I don't know if I would give if I had a kid and he was 16. Actually, if he was 16, if I can handle it, I would not want to give my 12 or 13-year-old this. I wouldn't feel too comfortable because these are real
yeah,
adult topics. And that
yeah,
doesn't mean they can't understand it, but I also wouldn't give myself everything that I read when I was 12 and
yeah,
13.
yeah,
I mean, I read Love Hina when I was like 11. I mean,
yeah,
great book, great concept.
yeah,
Loved it. It's probably served me in more ways than one, but it probably wasn't mature and appropriate for me either. And my parents were ignorant on that stuff. And then come find out later, well, there you go. But the idea is that I'm going to be watching what my kids read. And it's not because there's a lot of stuff that sneaks by. And it's unfortunate where, you don't want to give an 11-year-old a harem anime book per se, but I would give my 16-year-old this if I had a 16-year-old. I feel comfortable with them reading this. Maybe not my 13-year-old, maybe a 14-year-old, but
yeah,
it is interesting that it's not core. And
yeah,
it shows that, you could have a book that looks clean and it's fascinating because I didn't even think of it as a PG-13 book. It didn't even occur to me. I'm like, okay, this is
yeah,
definitely black and white horror, Marvel, 1970s, 1980s, more Eclipse. That's a name to throw out there, right? Like
yeah,
that's kind of the vibe I got, where it's like, okay, it's kind of that maybe they're not a pure adult, but they're not a kid either
yeah,
range. comic or just the classic horror stuff, and that's how I viewed it. But
Yeah, no, I definitely think it has themes that adults will appreciate and teenagers probably will not. Um, but I think about, like I said, I think about what I was reading when I was that age, and it was, the example I like to use is Mad Magazine. I mean, Mad Magazine, I read when I was a kid. I thought it was hilarious, but I had no idea what was going on in it. I mean, I read it and they were jokes, and the jokes were funny, but there were all kinds of references in Mad Magazine that I had no clue about when I was that age. And then when you go back and look at it, and you're like, oh yeah, this was about politics, this was about pop culture, this was about the war in Vietnam.
I mean, Spy versus Spy, we all know what that's about,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Well, the guy who created Spy versus Spy was from Cuba. He was a refugee from the regime in Cuba. What do you think the comic was about? Um,
Oh,
it,
the two things where you put it together and you put
yeah,
this page and this page, then it forms another. Oh,
yeah,
great stuff.
yeah. You when you read Dr. Seuss when you're a kid, you don't know the Better Butter Battle is about nuclear proliferation. Um,
What? That's what it's about.
um, but so I think it's definitely one of those things where teenagers could read it and they could like it, but they won't necessarily understand the bigger themes of it. Um, as I get older, I tend to write about older characters. I tend to write about older issues. I have 2 history degrees. I tend to write about history. If you have not been too familiar with history, you could learn something, but you won't necessarily like it if you don't like history. So,
Oh,
it's one
I
of those things.
love history. My favorite topic is the Mamluks and the Janissaries. That stuff is fascinating.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know everything, but when I read about it, I'm just like enthralled. And I don't really want to take a class on it. I don't want to know. I don't want to repeat information on it. But like when I'm reading about all this stuff, and then just it's amazing. But yeah, if you don't like history, man, there's a lot of cool stuff in history.
Man, yeah, no, one of my friends who really, really likes comics and actually had a GIS degree, said she took a history class and absolutely hated it, so never took history again. And she took a comics history class, and she said, "Oh, I love comics history," which
Like
when I was in school, comics history did not exist as a class. Like that was not something that we had.
I was not fortunate enough to have comic
Yeah.
history. I just had Paul Levitz teaching me for
Um,
writing for the media. So that was my
yeah.
comic history. He was a professor of mine for a semester.
And so she actually collects the Ditko Lee Spider-Man comics from the 60s and 70s. And I said, "How can you say you don't like history when all you read is old comics?" And I got a cultural history specialization for a master's degree. And while we didn't necessarily look at comics per se, we did look at visual culture, and I absolutely love that. When you look at a primary source document, you're looking at text, and you can interpret it different ways, but there's only so many ways you can interpret it. If you're looking at a visual document, there's a lot broader range of interpretation. Uh, there was a class I took where we looked at the period in newspapers in which illustration coexisted with early photography, and it was really interesting what they decided to illustrate which way, um, and you know which stories were the most accurate. Um, so it's something that's extremely obscure now. But it's the same thing with the overlapping period of color and black and white photography when
Yeah,
it was one or the other.
it's fascinating where, and I don't know if this is a primary document, but obviously I've had interviews with Howard Cruz and I've had interviews with Denny O'Neil, and we're talking. And I think if you're doing a live interview or a recorded interview, and they're telling about things, and there's things that in my Howard Cruz interview where he's talking about how he had a daughter and how Stuck Rubber Baby happened. For those who don't know, Howard Cruz was a gay man. He passed away. Rest in peace to him. And he was sort of tricked into having a daughter with another woman, but you're a gay man and coming to realize that you're a gay man in Alabama. and we were speaking about that, and there's not much information about his daughter out there, and it's a real tidbit of information. And my only regret is that I didn't get a second interview with him, because he would have done it. And it's kind of a crazy entity, but that's very much a primary source, I think. And I think people really just don't appreciate that stuff. And going back into newspapers, and I don't know if you've ever been to DC, but this museum is not in effect anymore. But the museum is a very cool museum where they have all these old articles, and you could pull something out from like the 1820s, and you're seeing what's on the newspaper in that time period, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, it really is.
And comic history is fascinating too. When you really go into the underground stuff, oh
Yeah.
man, that's some amazing content. And
Yeah, I was reading I was actually rereading American Splendor, some of the American Splendor stuff recently, and I was telling my kids like, yeah, this guy, because my daughter's like really big into comics, and she's like she kind of draws her own comics, and she writes about her own life, and she reads some of the YA comics that DC makes, and she's like, well, can you make a comic is about your life? I said, yeah, of course you can. Why couldn't you do that? And I started talking about Harvey Pekar, American Splendor, um, and and then I was like, wait a minute, like, why aren't I talking about webcomics? Like, there's so many webcomics like this. Like, it's like such a huge percentage of webcomics that are like this. Um, but I think the people who kind of grew up on webcomics don't really understand that when American Splendor did it, nobody was doing it. I mean, the underground comics weren't doing it. The mainstream comics weren't doing it. So it's funny to me that she said, "Hey, can you make comics about your own life?" Yeah, of course you can. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it now. Yeah, it's just funny. This is the perspective that you gain on it. Just thinking about certain things being ubiquitous, like we were talking about anime and manga, like we had no exposure to it. As people, have grown up on anime and manga at this point.
oh,
So
man, I got used to made fun of in school for this stuff.
yeah,
And I mean, I was the anime weeaboo kid. And then high school comes around, I'm wearing anime t-shirts and I'm wearing
yeah,
sweatpants. And I'm just like, I don't care. And I wasn't with the anime crew. And I'm like, I'm my own beat, man. And I enjoyed it. And I didn't care. And I still wear anime t-shirts. I'm wearing a DBZ shirt right now. Brand new, guys. Just opened this one up today.
yeah.
So,
That's
hey,
funny.
hey, 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 it's Majin Buu eating ice cream.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, if you
We had an anime club in college, and it was really the first anime club I had ever heard of. And it was funny because in those days you had your nerds, and then you had your anime nerds, and anime nerds are like looked down upon by everyone else. Now it's like anime is the mainstream.
used to see in college where we had the anime club.
Yeah,
It wasn't good, right? I went in my freshman year, and then I discovered drinking. So then me and my best friend in college, we created our own anime club called Let's Get Drunk and Watch Anime in my dorm room. And that club had a few honorary members once in a while, so we would call in, and it was great. And it was just one of those things, and I had a blast. And that's the true anime club. So you're watching anime completely plastered. I'm just saying.
yeah. And Pokemon was one of those things too. It was so huge. Like
Hey, you got to catch them all.
my my friend is about 10 years younger than me. He's like, hey, I'm gonna play Pokemon Go. Like, this is a few years ago. It was really big. I said, what's the attraction of that game? And he'd say, well, because you capture the Pokemon. Like, I was like, why do you want to capture Pokemon? Because that's what they do on Pokemon. Like that's the whole point of Pokemon. They capture the Pokemon. I said, okay. I never saw Pokemon. I don't know. And and he's like, what are you talking about? You never saw Pokemon. Now my kids are like into Pokemon. They're like, oh yeah,
I'm into
what's this?
Pokemon.
Yeah,
I'm
what's this
29.
Pokemon
It's
name?
great.
And so now I'm like trying to get a crash course on like who all these Pokemon are. I'm like asking people like this one looks like a cockroach. Like what's this one? Um, just because my kids look to me and go, like, hey, you must know about Pokemon, right? Like I'm like, yeah, sure. Um,
Hey, you got to catch them all. Yeah,
yeah.
except the last game does not look good. It looks like a gigantic cash grab.
What was that? The one that just came out?
Yeah, it looks like a
Yeah.
gigantic cash grab. and it's rough. I mean, it just looks bad,
Yeah.
and
Um,
I'm just saying.
my kids have an older Nintendo Switch one that's like a Pokemon Snap. And I'm like, okay, what's that game? He's like, yeah, you take pictures of Pokemon. I'm like, that's it, this whole game? I'm like, yeah,
I
okay.
mean, that's like old though. That's like a redone from like the N64. This is a great game. It's like you take pictures of 7 Pokemon, and it was like, oh my god,
Yeah.
it was great. And I didn't have an N64, and I knew somebody did. I'm like, oh my god, you could do this on this, and then you could like get a printer for your N64. You could print out your pictures. It was great. It was like the Game Boy,
Yeah, yeah.
which I
Yeah, my kids are asking
understand.
me about the generations of Nintendo because they've been playing Nintendo Switch a lot. I'm like, yeah, there was NES, there was Super NES, there was something else. Like I couldn't even remember all of them. Like it hasn't been that long, in the grand scheme of things, that there was an N64 and a Game Boy. Um,
I'm just saying. I'm just saying that you had a Game Boy printer. You were rich back in the day.
yeah,
You were rich. You could buy
yeah,
a Game Boy printer for like 50.
yeah. I actually have a printer right behind me, right here. But yeah, there are people who grew up and they never had a printer. So why do I need a
No, no,
printer?
no, not a printer, a Game Boy printer.
Yeah, yeah,
Everybody had a printer back in the
yeah,
day.
yeah.
A
They
Game
used
Boy
to. Yeah,
printer meant you were wealthy.
yeah,
You were the cool kid in school.
yeah,
Your daddy owned like a business that was like producing millions of dollars if you got your Game Boy printer. And you were like the guy. And if
yeah.
you had a Game Boy printer, it was like owning a Charizard in school. You owned the school. And people be like, you're the man. It was great.
Well,
I'm
there you
just
go.
saying how it
There
was,
you
man. Like we are a long far cry from rewards, aren't we?
go. Yeah.
I wonder what the comment says. Yeah. That's a funny comment. Who is your daddy and what does he do? Yeah. That's a funny comment for this conversation. I should really get back to rewards here. Like we just took like a 20-minute tangent
Yeah.
out of nowhere. So obviously there's a bunch of stuff, and then there's also several combo packs of everything that I mentioned, and I should probably re-mention everything. So you could get this cover, you could get this cover, you could get this giant size cover, both physical or digital, or all of them in a combo pack, or you could mix and match. I'm not exactly sure, but everybody could get whatever pretty much you want of these covers, and then you could add this on as an add-on. But also you could add on other things, including and we spoke about it, but Super Heresies, which is your superhero book, The Advocator, Doctor Orange, which is a massively sad story apparently, and you treated her well. It's not bad enough that a jack-o'-lantern wants to kill you. There's a bunch of other stuff, and then there's other things that are obviously that could be added on from the entire company that you run in your comic line. And anything that you have done in comics can be added on. I think Bless the Children can be added on, or Bless Children, I forget the full name of it, and a variety of other things. The original, Two-Eyed magazine, Two-Eyed Tales magazine can be added on, and so on and so forth. I don't think I need to go through your whole catalog, unless you would like me to.
No, it's all right. Yeah, but yeah. So because we have add-ons now on Kickstarter, you can mix and match, get whatever you like. I feel like people are a little bit more comfortable using add-ons now. I know the interface isn't totally great, and when they first came out, people were kind of hesitant to use them. But I'm seeing a lot of add-ons now, um, so you can add on, mix and match, get whatever you like. The rewards are very simple. There's nothing other than comics, theme songs, digital comics. The giant sized. If you enjoy this conversation in pop culture, you might like the giant size edition because I have commentary pages where I talk about every page and every panel and what went on in my head about it.
And then obviously, I do want to back it out because I do want to ask you one final question before I give you a chance to self promote. And this is actually a very interesting question because I've seen a few other people start asking this question. And I had somebody on, and this was not planned, by the way, but he does horror comic stuff. Welcome to Slaughterville, which is a board game and a comic before you. And so I was like 5 minutes late because we were going for a while as well. But you and I both know that horror comics right now are really big. We have places like Second Sight Publishing and Scout and Boom Studios are doing a lot of horror stuff. And even Decade in DC did really well. And there really appears to be a massive shift where a lot of people are gravitating towards horror comics versus superhero comics or, thrillers or other things. And maybe thrillers are sort of horror comics too. But why do you think why do you think that has occurred now in the comic realm and why it's really popular? Because I feel like that wasn't there 2, 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's a little interesting to me. I think part of it is Kickstarter, and the fact that there has been a demand for horror comics for a long time. There's always been some, but they weren't terribly mainstream. So I think people really wanted to make their own, and then Kickstarter kind of blew up, and people were able to make their own. So, I think also there've been a handful of horror movies lately that have gotten a lot of attention. Used to be there were horror movies, but nobody saw them. Yeah, certainly the '80s was really big for horror, but after that, um, until recently, we hadn't seen like a lot of high-profile horror movies, and I think it's gotten people involved in the genre some more than they had been in the past. With Jordan Peele coming in, doing a bunch of horror movies.
Well,
Um,
that shit scared the fuck
yeah,
out of me. I
uh,
was not expecting Jordan Peele, who's supposed to be funny, to
yeah.
do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I loved Key and Peele when it was on. I was skeptical about him going into the Twilight Zone and doing horror stuff, but he's awesome. I mean, I love his stuff. Um,
I got to give him props where I was wrong, and I got no problem admitting I was wrong. But I don't think I was unjustifiably wrong because I think there was questions. But I'm happy I was wrong.
yeah, and then A24 has made a couple of horror movies that have done really well, Midsummer and Hereditary and stuff like that. So I think there's just interest in the genre, and I think that the big two publishers are just really not doing it, and I think that's driving the smaller publishers to do it. I mean, DC even had an imprint for Joe Hill's comics, Hill House. I read some of those; those were pretty good. But for the most part, they don't really do horror comics. So I think people are just doing what they want, and I don't think it's the only genre that's kind of come back to some extent. I think that anthologies, just general anthologies, have come back, and I think a lot of that's due to Kickstarter too, where people go, hey, I can make an anthology and I can make it cheaper than if I did it all myself because I can have other people contribute, and it can again be successful on a crowdfunding because people can leverage everybody leverages their own networks, and if there's 20 creators, you have a lot of potential there for a successful campaign. So I think that's one of the reasons anthologies have done really well on Kickstarter. With the same kind of situation where we aren't really seeing anthology books from the big two too much anymore. So I think just the whole idea of crowdfunding, not Kickstarter only, but mostly Kickstarter, has really gotten some genres that come back in comics that really were kind of dead for a while, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I mean there's plenty of stuff that I think is really well, and what I'm hoping is going to be the next big genre that comes back is real military comics, because that's kind of my jam, and that's what I really enjoy, and it's one of my favorite topics to read about and write about, and there's just a lot of good content out there on it, but you have to hunt it down, and there's really only one major player doing it on a good comic level right now, and I think there's a massive amount of potential on Kickstarter for it. And if I have my way with that company, I'm going to try to shift them over into that position first and foremost. But I'm hoping that's one of the next genres to come back because I think there's a lot that could be done in that realm. But I digress. Um, and we've been speaking for almost an hour and a half
Yeah,
plus. So my voice is hoarse. I did an hour and 40 before you. I'm almost at an hour 40 here. I
yeah,
would like to go to sleep sometime soon
yes.
tonight. But I do want to give you a chance to self promote yourself. So where can people back this Kickstarter, check out your other work, check out your website, find you on social media, and more importantly, just give you money so you can keep writing comics?
So our Kickstarter is at 2itales.com. And goes for 12 more days. Actually, I think almost we're down to 11. And then we have a website at heresystudiosllc.com. We have 2 Facebook pages, Heresy Studios LLC and Order of Dracula. We have a Twitter at Heresy Studios LL. We have a Instagram at Heresy Studios LLC Comics. So yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, and I'm going to just say this, and I've been saying it 27, almost 28 months, every single month, almost at least 4 times a week, if not more. You have to support indie comics. Indie comics, for those who don't know, every book that's funded on Kickstarter goes into the production of making that book possible in one way or another, whether that's printing the book, paying for the art, paying for the next book's art, paying the colorists, paying for covers, doing marketing, getting to cons, or even possibly helping that artist buy supplies or keeping the lights on so that artist can work or that writer can work. And it does make a difference. And again, you're not DC, you're not Marvel, you're not Image. So every dollar does actually, as I stated, make the book happen. And so every dollar that you donate, pledge, or contribute to a Kickstarter goes a long, long way. And it is beyond helpful. And so and the way you support indie comics is you back Kickstarters, because that money does go to the books. And whether you're pledging $1 or $100 or $1,000, every little bit helps. So I recommend people actually back Kickstarters. Now, I get it. Maybe this book is not for you. And I can tell you that, Hearsay Studios, or Heresy Studios, has a lot of different books. So if you're not a fan of Two-Eyed Tales, you might be a fan of Cult of Dracula or Dr. Orange, or you might be a fan of a superhero book, or you might say, hey, look, let me pick up a copy of The Advocator, which is sort of a sampler of a bunch of books. So there's something for everybody that Joseph has put out there. And let's say you don't back that, but you're like, hey, I really like Dracula books. If you pick up Cult of Dracula, I can tell you for a fact that you are indirectly supporting this campaign, and that's another way how to support. And if you're in a certain circumstance where money's tight and things are going on in your life, everybody's been there, another way how to support is just share out the project. Because if you send out a tweet, you share it out in a Facebook group, you never know who's watching, you never know who's going to see it, and it goes a long way, because it could just very well be that your friend sees it and then your friend pledges $100, and that can make the difference. So that's something that people should do. And as far as that I'm concerned, and I'm getting to the point where I can't speak, almost 4 hours, guys, almost 4 hours of speaking tonight. And I am definitely going to be making myself a cup of tea in 10 minutes from now. But for me, obviously, I appreciate shares, supports, likes on all my videos, all my interviews, YouTube, Pop Anime Comics, Facebook, Pop Anime Comics. Come bother me on my personal Facebook page if you can find it. Instagram, Pop Anime Comics. I just appreciate a like, share. But if you do want to advertise on my show, you are more than welcome to advertise on my show. DM me on Twitter. Hit me up on Facebook, Pop Anime Comics. You can email me at andrewedavis@hotmail.com. And I got some big coming in the next 2 months. Also, we are coming into podcast format. And I will let everybody know that there's a bunch of episodes that people haven't heard in a while. And you are on one of those episodes that's going to be in season 1. It's coming. So if you want to hear that first interview, that's a really good way how to hear that first interview. Also, you could buy my metal card, you can buy my merch, or you can go on Buy Me a Coffee and buy yourself a guaranteed guest spot, which is, there's only 2 ways to get on this show. There's only 2 ways to get on this show. You got a fucking badass comic that interests me, or you're buying in. And you can like that, not like that. I don't care, because those are the only 2 ways. And I'm the guy who makes the decisions around here. So that's what it is. On that note, hopefully we're not canceled, and I'm going to give you the final word.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, that wraps that up.
Yeah.